Hey there, welcome to another Graphite Studio tutorial. In this chapter, we'll go over the following features in Graphite Studio. You'll learn the basics of how to create a web application project using Graphite Studio. You'll learn how to create a category, an entity, a behavior, and a view. You'll also learn how to set up language translations and what it looks like to create a new view behavior. Then we will set up an environment, and finally, we will build and deploy a project. Let's get started. When you open Graphite Studio, you will see the Graphite Studio home screen. From here, you can either create a new project or open an existing one. But in this tutorial, we'll be creating a new project. So click the tile that says New. On the New Project screen, you have the option to either create a library or a new application. Make sure New Web Application is selected. Every Graphite Studio project has two parts to it, a group and a name. In the group, type Graphite GTC Guide. And in the name of the project, type Calculator. Graphite Studio has the capability to create the project in any location that has been set up in the config file. But in this case, let's save the project to the local implementation project location. This project won't have a database, so switch off Graphite GTC Data Model. Now these are all the libraries that are available for your project. For this simple calculator, we will only be using the base library called Graphite GTC.core, which is required for every project created in Graphite Studio. Now push Next. This next section shows all the objects that are in the libraries that we selected. In future projects, you may not need all the different objects associated with a specific library, but in this case you'll need every one. So let's leave them all checked. And click OK. This brings us to the project homepage. As you can see, the name of the project is in the top left. The gray location icon indicates that the project is on my hard drive. When this icon is green, it means that you are creating this project in a source control. Currently, the source control options available are TFS for on-prem and Azure DevOps if you want to develop the project in the cloud. And this is the name of the location. The blue box you see here on the homepage is used to keep all the project's artifacts organized. Graphite Studio supports domain-driven design, so we like to see our developers create a blue category for every domain within a project, and keep all the artifacts related to that category or domain. Here you have entities, web services, and query services. Data contracts are entities that are not stored in the database, and external references are calling external binaries, in case you have code already written as binaries and want to call into those binaries. Views are web pages, and element packs are collections of reusable widgets that appear in multiple views. All the objects that were pulled from the base library are stored inside the common category. So let's go ahead and create a new category by pushing New Category. And we'll call it Financial. And click OK. This creates a new category with no artifacts. Next, let's create an entity. To do this, click Add, Edit, which brings up a drop-down where you can choose which entity you want to create. For the developers watching this video, an entity is what we call a class file that contains properties, methods, and other features of any well-designed object-oriented class. So let's call this Interest, and click OK. On this screen, you can look at all the details behind the Interest entity. Here you can see properties, behaviors which are methods, templates are equal to interfaces, diagrams automatically shows you a composite diagram of this entity, tags make it easy to search for groups within your project, events are for business events, which we'll go over in another chapter, and the Data tab is to set up seed data within the entity. In this project, we won't be setting up any properties for this class, so we'll just put one behavior in it. Go to the Behavior tab and click Add Behavior. This will bring you to the Behavior screen, where you create the logic behind the behavior. Again, for developers watching, behaviors are a public static method or a method that can be called from another behavior. Let's name this behavior calculate simple interest. And now we'll jump into developing the full logic behind the behavior by building flowcharts. By double-clicking a shape, you can enter the details of that shape. The start shape is used to set up inputs and outputs that come into a behavior. Let's add some inputs. Create an input and call it principal. There are many base data types to choose from, but for principal, choose currency. Add another input and call it rate. Graphite features type ahead, so push tab, and for type, choose decimal by typing DEC. Add a final input and call it duration. And for type, select integer by typing INT. Now let's create one output. Click Add and select Output. Name it interest amount. And for type, choose currency. And that should be everything behind the start shape. The next shape we'll add by clicking the plus icon that comes up when you select a shape. This will bring up a list of all possible shapes you can add to the start shape. Add a decision shape so we can do some if logic. Double-click the decision shape and enter principal in the second field. Now our statement will be if principal is less than or equal to 0. Add this and click OK. You can see that Graphite Studio automatically adds comments to shapes. If you want to overwrite this, double-click and add a description to the comment field. For this project, let's just leave the default comment. Now the decision shape has two paths. One for when the if statement succeeds, and one for when it fails. Let's click plus and select the assigned shape. Now the first shape we add to the decision shape will default to yes. So if the principal is less than or equal to 0, all I want to do is set the interest amount to 0. Now what if the principal is more than 0? I want to add the evaluation shape to start calculating the interest amount. So the first evaluation shape will be used to calculate the accrued amount using the formula principal times open bracket 1 plus open bracket rate divided by 100 close bracket times duration close bracket. Now use the into field to place the result of that expression into a new variable called accrued amount and click OK. Let's add another evaluation shape to calculate the actual interest amount. Take the accrued amount and subtract the principal from it. And that will be the interest amount, so enter interest amount in the into field. Finally, end the flowchart by adding an end shape to the second evaluate shape. To connect the set interest amount to 0 shape, hover over the shape and click and hold the dot icon at the bottom of the shape. This will let you drag a connection to the end shape. To clean up the flowchart, you can move the arrows around. Why not try experimenting with that now? And that's how you create a behavior. We created a method and called it calculate simple interest. It takes a few inputs and returns an output. The next step will be to make a view. In order to build a view, we have to go back to the project homepage. So click the project name. Now create a new category and call it Screens. As expected, there are no entities associated with this category, so use the drop-down and create a new view. A view is one of the application's web pages, and it will take you to the Graphite Studio UI Builder, where you can build all the logic behind a web page. This display where you see Preview gives you a preview of your page as you add new elements. Let's give this view the name Interest Page. For the view-related properties, let's title the page Interest. This is the page title that will show up on the tab of the browser. Default view indicates that this will be the start page of the app. Set that to Yes, and click Save. When building a web page, the layout is divided into 4 sections: the header, the region, which can be left or right, the content, and the footer. First, we'll be adding some UI elements into the header. On the left side of the screen, you can see all the pre-built widgets that come with Graphite Studio. So to add a UI element, or a view element as we call them, drag and drop them from the sidebar. Or you can push the plus icon you see in the top right corner of the page section and see all the view elements that can be added to that specific section. In this case, I'm going to add the toolbar panel. When you add any element, you can see that the preview page is automatically updated to show the changes. When you click on a view element, under the page preview, you'll see all the properties related to it. In that properties section, change the title of the toolbar to Interest. And when I tab out, you can see that the title of the toolbar in the page preview updates. To get a better view, you can double click on the page preview to expand the display. To get an idea of what's going on behind the scenes, you can preview the HTML by clicking the pencil above the page preview. But now that we're done with the header, let's add some view elements into the content area of the screen. To free up some screen space, you can collapse the header area by clicking this arrow. In the content, add a form, and to that form, add a couple of field sets. In the first field set, add a currency field, and add a numeric field. Looks like we added the wrong one. If you add the wrong view element or want to get rid of one, just select it and press delete. Now let's add the right view element, the numeric field. In the second field set, also add a numeric field. And if you double click the preview again, you will see that all these fields have been added. Now we're going to set the properties of each field we added, such as labels, masks, and placeholder text. Click on the currency field first so we can start to add its values to its properties. In the name field, type in principal field. The focus index is for setting the tabbing order. Input 1. Set label field to principal. And that's it. Now we can move on to the next field in the field set, the numeric field. Give it the name rate field and set focus index to 2. And set the label to rate. If you select mask, it will give you all available options for masks. Scroll down to the numeric masks and choose limit decimals. There's a document in the Knowledge Center that further explains masking. When you get a chance, take a look at that to get a better understanding of what kind of masking is allowed in Graphite Studio. Now let's fill in the properties in the final field, and give it the label duration. Set focus index to 3, and give it the label duration. Select mask and scroll down to the numeric masks, and select the no decimals mask, because number of years will be an integer. Because I want to let the user know that they can only enter a number of years, I'm going to add a placeholder that says, please enter number of years. As you can see, I didn't add any spaces. This is intentional because it helps in translation support. Now save the view and check the preview. That all looks good. Now we're going to finish the page by adding a button panel. And in the button panel, add one button and call it Calculate Button. In the properties, set the focus index to 4 and give it a title, Calculate. Now I'm adding a heading. And I'll call it Simple Interest. Finally, let's add some HTML text that will eventually display the value calculated. Give the HTML text the name Simple Interest Text. And set the mask to be a currency item, so scroll down to Numeric and select Currency $. And we have completed the view, so go ahead and click Save. If you look at the page preview, you can see that the placeholders still don't have any spaces between the words. In the next part of the tutorial, we will go over how to set up the page translations. Let's go back to the project homepage. If you click Add Edit, you have a selection that says Edit Languages. Click on that, and a dialog box will pop up that gives you all the details of the translation keys and their values. By default, the language that is available is US English. In a later video, we'll go over how to add other languages. All the keywords and all the views you have created without translations will show up at the top, and all the translations that were included in the library will show up under these. Now let's go through and enter the translation for each one of these keywords. Some may match the keyword, but that's okay. Go through and fill these out as well. And this is where we can add spaces to strings of words. Once you finish these, select Save and close the dialog. If you hit Ctrl-Tab, you can see all the windows currently open in Graphite Studio. Do this and select the interest page. Now if you go to the preview, you'll see that the names still have not updated. By clicking the refresh icon, it will update all the translations you just set. In the next part of the tutorial, we're going to add logic to the button. In order to get to the properties of any widget, you can hold Ctrl and click it in the preview. This will open the properties for that widget. In order for our interest calculator to run when the user clicks Calculate, we will have to create an on-click behavior for the button. But before we do that, we need to set the property form to Submit, which tells the behavior which forms are going to be included in the calculation. Click the property and select Form 1. Now save the view. And click Add Behavior. This should look familiar. When you click Add Behavior, Graphite Studio creates a new behavior flowchart. But they are slightly different than an entity's flowchart. If you double-click the Start shape, you'll see that there were some inputs and outputs already set up. We'll go over the automatically populated input current user in a later video, so don't worry about that right now. Because we set the form to Submit in the button properties, this behavior automatically creates the fields as inputs with the appropriate data tag. Because this behavior knew what form is being submitted to the button, it goes through all the fields of that form and creates them as inputs with the correct data type that it figures out. If it's a numeric field, it will name it decimal. If it's a currency field, it will name it currency. The output variable is a list of this object, called page instruction, which returns to the client instructions that the page should execute on the return from the call to the on-click calculate button. In order to complete the logic for the button, there are two things that need to be done. Invoke the calculate simple interest behavior we created in the interest entity, and take the output of that, which will be the calculated interest amount, and update the HTML text we named simple interest text on the view we built. In order to call one behavior from another, use the run behavior shape. add this to the flowchart. Double-click the Run Behavior shape and choose the source entity of the behavior we need to call. In this case, is the one we created called interest. The next drop-down shows all the behaviors in that entity. We only created the one behavior, so choose that. When you select the behavior, you'll see a list of all expected inputs and all outputs that the behavior will return. In the placeholder in each of these inputs, you'll see which data type is expected. Duration has the duration information, principal has the principal information, and rate field has the rate information. However, the duration field is expecting an integer. If we quickly look at the duration field, we see that it is expecting a decimal. We'll come back to correct that later. For duration, enter duration field. Because this is expecting an integer and the duration field will be sending a decimal, we'll be running into a build error later on. We'll have to come back and fix that problem. For principal, enter principal field. And for rate, enter rate field. In programming terms, what we are doing here is we're writing a line called interest.calculate simple interest, open bracket, duration field, comma, principal field, comma, rate field, close bracket, semicolon. So these are the inputs that are expected by calculate simple interest. In order to access the interest amount, we will be using this keyword. We will be saying interest calculate simple interest result dot outputs dot interest amount. This will give us access to the currency that is being returned, and you can use it in any way you want in the rest of the flowchart. The next shape we'll add is called the page instruction shape. This shape is a way we can set up an instruction that can be sent back to the client so the browser can process the instruction and update the page. In this case, we'll use the value type and say update an element on the screen. And we will update the value of that element, and the target element will be the simple interest text. So let's update the value with the output that we called with the page instruction. Click OK and finish the flowchart. Just to review the page instruction shape, I want to update an element on the screen called simple interest text, and I want to update it with the output we see from calling interest.calculate simple interest. The next step is to build and deploy our interest calculator. In order to deploy our web application, we have to set up certain environment information so that Graphite knows what the web server name is and what the website name is. By clicking on the tab on the right side of the screen, you open up the sidebar menu where you can see a sidebar item called Environments. Click that. Graphite has the capability to deploy to several environments, and you set those up here. In this case, we'll just be adding one. We'll call it sample deploy, and we'll deploy to local. Set the web server to localhost, and call the website local.guide-calculator.com. Set this environment to default and public, and click OK. So you just created your environment, and now you're ready to build and deploy this application. Now click on the sidebar again and select Build. This will take you to the build screen, where we can see we are doing a release build and the environment we are deploying to. When you click the build button, Graphite takes the metadata, which is all the visual components, and turns it into an intermediate language, and compiles the intermediate language into two C# projects. After that, it invokes MS Build and Web Deploy to build and deploy the project. As we expected, we see an error message here. Click on this error message and push Ctrl+C and paste it into Notepad. Or you can go into Windows Explorer and type in %temp %, and if you order by date, you'll see a Graphite exception log. Let's see where this problem is. It happened in the call simple interest and happened on the on-click calculate button. Now click on this pencil and select the interest page. You can also use the Graphite Studio search feature to find the on-click calculate button. What the error is saying is that the behavior is passing a decimal, but is expecting an integer. To fix it, we can go to our simple interest behavior and change duration into a decimal. Or we can go to the start shape and change the duration field to an integer. When the form is submitted, it will turn the decimal into an integer so that it can pass through the on-click behavior as an integer. Let's also make this field not required in case someone chooses not to enter a value. Now let's save our changes. A cool feature of Graphite is the smart refactoring. Because we made a destructive change, like changing something from a decimal to an integer, Graphite automatically does a complete analysis of the project to determine if any artifacts will be affected by this change and lists them here. It either tells you that they can be automatically updated or if they need to be manually modified. In this case, everything looks good. Let's go try another build. By pushing Ctrl Tab, you'll see all the open windows in Graphite Studio. Go to the build screen and click Build. As you can see, converting and compiling all the artifacts is nearly instantaneous. In release mode, the fourth step takes about 40 seconds because all the JavaScript and CSS generated is compressed and obfuscated for security purposes. If this was built in debug mode, the site would have been fully built in 3 to 4 seconds. Now that it is finished deploying, you can go see the site. Unless your Graphite Studio trial is possibly expired. When you see this error, what we call a sad cloud, for security purposes, there are no details about the error. When you build in release mode, it thinks that you are going into production. Because good security standards is a focus in Graphite Studio, we don't allow end users to see what type of error they're running into. If you go into Windows Explorer, go to C, inetpub, and find the application you just built, which is Guide Calculator, you can see a folder called Logs. Open that and you'll see a list of logs. Open it in Notepad and you will see the error. In this case, it was due to an invalid license. Now there's another way to see this error. If you go into Settings on the sidebar and click Debug, you can switch on Debug. Now go back to the build page and rebuild. And go back to the browser and refresh. Because it is in debug mode, it will now show the error message. Just like in the log folder, it says invalid license. If you downloaded Graphite and use it for more than 30 days, you will have to extend the trial. Do this by going back to Graphite Studio and select Settings in the sidebar. Go to License and select Extend Trial. Graphite Studio communicates with our license server and extends your trial for the project for 30 days. Now go back to the build page one last time and rebuild the site. Go back to the browser and refresh the page. And there it is, the simple interest calculator we just built. Good work, and thanks for watching.